As the years passed, the awakened humans gradually began to fade, not from illness or age, but from the simple, inexorable weight of existing as living monuments to species-wide failure. They had never been meant to carry such a burden, and consciousness itself had become their eternal punishment. One by one, they began to return to their ships, not to sleep, but to die. They called it the final reconciliation, a gentle end to lives that had been defined by impossible grief. The galaxy watched in reverent silence as humanity chose to close its own story, not in anger or despair, but with the quiet dignity of those who had finally laid their burden down. Zith stood in the observation deck of the last human ship, watching as the final survivors prepared their eternal rest. The human leader, now ancient beyond her years, approached him with steps that seemed to carry the weight of worlds. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "for witnessing our story, for ensuring that our mistakes will not be forgotten. Though, universe is dimmer without you," Zith replied, his crystalline form flickering with unshed tears. "Your pain taught us the value of peace. Your sorrow showed us the price of hatred." She smiled then, the first genuine expression of peace he had seen from any human. "Perhaps that's enough. Perhaps our tragedy can become other species' wisdom." As the last human entered cryosleep for the final time, knowing she would never wake again, the galaxy held its breath. The ships would continue their eternal journeys through space, but now they carried not sleeping refugees, but honored dead, martyrs, to the cause of universal peace. In the years that followed, the rule "don't wake the humans" took on new meaning. It became not a command but a prayer, a promise that their sacrifice would be remembered, their lesson never forgotten, their peace never again disturbed. The Zelian archives were renamed the Human Memorial Library, where every species could come to learn the ultimate truth, that the greatest civilizations could fall not to outside threats but to their own failure to love each other more than they hated their differences. And in the deepest vaults of that library, Zith kept one final recording, the sound of the last human's final words whispered as she closed her eyes forever. "Forgive us, universe. We tried to be better. We failed. Please, please be better than we were." The stars themselves seemed to dim in acknowledgement, and across the galaxy, every species silently renewed their commitment to the promise humanity's sacrifice had written in sorrow across the cosmos. Never again. In the days that followed, the galactic community watched in stunned silence as the truth about humanity spread through every corner of known space. The humans weren't the sleeping giants of legend. They were the walking wounded, carrying scars that ran deeper than any physical injury. The integration process was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Other species approached the awakened humans not with celebration, but with the gentle reverence reserved for the terminally ill. The void crawlers, once feared across the galaxy, found themselves weeping alongside the humans, their natural affinity for darkness allowing them to understand the depths of human despair. "We thought we were the universe's greatest tragedy," the void crawler representative transmitted through their hive mind. "But you are grief itself, given form." The humans had established what they called memorial settlements, not cities or colonies, but spaces of eternal mourning where they could gather to remember what they had lost. These weren't places of healing, but sanctuaries for the inconsolable, where sorrow was honored rather than overcome. Young Zelian scientists would visit these settlements, not to study human technology or culture, but to learn the true weight of consequences. "Every choice echoes through eternity" became their new motto, carved into crystalline monuments throughout their worlds. Zith found himself appointed as the universe's first keeper of human memory, a position that required him to document and preserve the stories of Earth's final days. Each testimony was more devastating than the last, painting a picture of a species that had possessed everything and chosen to destroy it all. "They had artists," Zith reported to the Galactic Council, his form flickering with borrowed pain. "Poets who could make stone weep, musicians who could speak to the hearts of stars. They had healers who could cure any illness, teachers who could illuminate any darkness. and they used all of it to perfect the art of mutual destruction. The humans had brought with them archives of their lost world, not as trophies or memories, but as evidence of their crimes. They showed holographic recordings of Earth's final seasons, the last spring that never came, the final harvest that fed no one, the last children's laughter echoing through empty playgrounds. "This is what we were," a human archivist explained, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "We were gods in our own garden, and we chose to burn it down rather than tend it together." The galaxy's younger species began to change, their own conflicts seeming petty in comparison to the ultimate tragedy they now witnessed daily. Territorial disputes were resolved with the question, "Do you want to become like the humans?" Wars ended before they began, peace treaties signed with humanity's fate as the eternal example of what not to become. But perhaps the cruelest irony was that even in their state of perpetual mourning, the humans continued to be brilliant. Their technology, their art, their philosophy, all of it was tinged with the wisdom that only comes from ultimate loss. They created beauty that could break hearts across species, wrote poetry that made entire worlds weep, and solved problems with the desperate urgency of those who knew exactly what failure looked like. "We are living proof," the human leader explained to a gathering of galactic representatives, "that intelligence without wisdom is the universe's greatest weapon of mass destruction. We achieve the stars, but we never learn to achieve peace with ourselves." The humans had become the galaxy's conscience, walking reminders of the price of unchecked ambition and unresolved hatred. They served not as leaders or advisors, but as eternal witnesses to their own tragedy, ensuring that no other species would follow their path to self-destruction. The truth unraveled like a star collapsing into itself. The humans hadn't entered cryosleep to preserve their civilization. They had done it to escape the unbearable weight of their own guilt. Their ships weren't arks of survival. They were flying mausoleums carrying the last survivors of a species that had committed genocide against itself. High Commander Zistos materialized in the human ship's main hall, her ancient crystalline form barely maintaining cohesion in the presence of such overwhelming grief. Around her, the awakened humans sat in small groups, holding each other as they wept for losses that time could never heal. "We know your story," Zistos whispered, her usual commanding presence reduced to that of a mourning child. "We've watched your ships for centuries, and we know what you carry." The human leader looked up, her eyes red with tears that had been held back for lifetimes. "Then you know why we can never forgive ourselves. We had everything. A beautiful world. Unlimited potential, the stars themselves within our reach. And we threw it all away for power, for resources, for hatred." A young human, barely more than a teenager when they had entered cryosleep, spoke through broken sobs. "I was supposed to start university. I was going to study marine biology, save the coral reefs. Instead, I watched them all die in the acid rain. The last dolphin died 3 days before we entered the ships." Around the room, similar stories poured out like blood from ancient wounds. Scientists who had watched their research become weapons. Teachers who had seen their students become soldiers. Parents who had outlived their children in a war that no one could win. "We tried to stop it," another human whispered, her voice barely audible. "In the final months, we tried everything. Peace treaties, ceasefires, humanitarian corridors. But it was too late. The hatred had grown too strong, the wounds too deep. We were killing each other even as our world died around us." Six, the young researcher whose curiosity had caused this awakening, approached one of the weeping humans with trembling crystalline appendages. "But surely there must have been some hope? Some reason to continue?" The human looked at them with eyes that held the depth of cosmic voids. "Hope? Child, we killed hope first. It was easier to fight without it." Ambassador Crystal found herself surrounded by humans sharing their memories, each story more heartbreaking than the last. A woman who had been a children's entertainer, who had watched playgrounds become battlefields. A man who had been a chef, who had seen the last farms burned and the last livestock slaughtered out of spite. "The worst part," the human leader continued, her voice growing stronger even as her pain deepened, wasn't the death. It was the moment we realized we were going to survive. Some of us would live to see what we had done, to count the cost of our choices. So we chose to sleep, to hide from our own reflection. The Zelian delegation's forms had dimmed to almost nothing, their usual radiance extinguished by the sheer magnitude of human suffering. They had come prepared for many things, but not for this, not for meeting a species that had looked into the abyss of their own nature and found only darkness. We became the monsters in our own fairy tales. Another human added, her laughter tinged with madness. And now we're awake again, and the nightmare continues. The response was immediate. Within moments, their research vessel was surrounded by a fleet of Zelian warships. But these weren't weapons of war. They were vessels of mourning, their crystalline hulls dimmed in preparation for the universe's greatest tragedy. High Commander Zistos appeared on their screen, her ancient form deep purple with rage and grief. "You absolute fools," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of eons. "Do you have any idea what suffering you've awakened?" "High Commander," Zith began desperately. "Perhaps we could—" Too late. Her voice dropped to a whisper of devastation. "They're awake. May the first light have mercy on their tortured souls." The human ship's communication systems crackled to life, broadcasting on frequencies not heard for centuries. But the message that came through wasn't one of anger or confusion. It was a sound that would haunt the galaxy forever. The sound of a species discovering once again that they still existed. Why? The single word carried such profound anguish that 3 Zelian crew members immediately began to crack, their crystalline forms unable to process such concentrated despair. "Why have you brought us back to this nightmare?" Ambassador Crystal, her name now seeming cruelly ironic, led the diplomatic team that docked with the human ship. She had been trained for first contact, for negotiation, for peace, but nothing could have prepared her for the sight that awaited them. The humans stood in the airlock wearing the same clothes they had worn when they first entered cryosleep, centuries ago. Their eyes were hollow, not with sleep, but with the kind of emptiness that comes from witnessing the end of everything you've ever loved. "So?" The human leader spoke, her voice a broken whisper. "You're the ones who thought it would be merciful to drag us back to consciousness. Most esteemed humans," Ambassador Crystal began, her carefully prepared words crumbling before such raw grief. "We extend our deepest apologies. We never meant to—" "Save it," the human interrupted, but there was no anger in her voice, only exhaustion that seemed to span millennia. "Do you know what we dream about in there? Do you have any idea what plays on repeat in our minds during those endless centuries?" The diplomatic team's crystalline forms flickered with shared anguish as the human continued. "We dream of our children, the billions who died in the wars. We dream of our cities burning, of our oceans boiling, of the last bird falling from a poisoned sky. We dream of the moment we realized we had destroyed everything beautiful in our world, and we were the only ones left to remember it." Another human stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "We chose sleep because consciousness was torture. Every waking moment was a reminder that our species had committed the ultimate sin. We had murdered our own future." Ambassador Crystal's form began to dim as the weight of realization settled upon her. We thought you were sleeping to preserve your species. We believed you were heroes who had saved themselves." The human leader laughed, but it was the sound of glass breaking in an empty room. "Heroes? We're the villains of our own story. We destroyed our paradise, and then we were too cowardly to face the consequences. We ran away into sleep, leaving our ruins as a monument to our failure." The Zelian prided themselves on being the most advanced civilization in the known universe. Their crystalline bodies, once brilliant with internal bioluminescence, now flickered dimly through their pristine cities, suspended in the clouds of their home world. They had mastered quantum mechanics before most species had figured out basic arithmetic, their technology so advanced that faster-than-light travel seemed as simple as learning to tie shoelaces. Yet for all their achievements, there was one universal law that even the mighty Zelian followed without question. Don't wake the humans. The rule wasn't born from fear of human power. It was born from compassion for their infinite grief. Chief. Science Officer Zith brushed his crystalline appendages against the control panel of his research vessel. His form dimmed with the weight of ancient knowledge. The holographic display showed the latest human colony ship they'd discovered, and his crew maintained their respectful distance, not from protocol alone, but from reverence for the sleeping souls within. The humans hadn't chosen cryosleep. They had fled into it. Their planet hadn't run out of resources, it had run out of hope. During their Third World War, as billions perished and their world burned, the survivors had made a desperate choice. Unable to bear the weight of their species' self-destruction, they had sealed themselves away in ships that became floating tombs of regret. "Fascinating creatures," Zith whispered, his voice carrying the sorrow that had echoed through the galaxy for centuries. "They look so peaceful when they sleep. Hard to believe they carry such unbearable pain." The galactic archives contained not warnings, but eulogies, countless records of other species who had encountered awakened humans and witnessed their inconsolable anguish. The humans would wake, remember what they had lost, and the sound of their collective weeping could be heard across star systems. Entire civilizations had been reduced to tears by the sheer magnitude of human sorrow. Zith's junior researcher, Zix, floated nearby, their young crystalline form pulsing with curiosity. Fresh from the academy, they had studied human biology with fascination, unaware of the terrible truth behind their eternal slumber. "Sir," Zix ventured, "our scans show anomalies in their cryogenic systems. Perhaps we could—" "No," Zith's voice cracked like breaking crystal. "We must never disturb their peace, it's all they have left." But Zix's curiosity burned brighter than wisdom. While Zith attended to other duties, the young researcher activated a quantum probe, thinking only of scientific discovery. They had no idea they were about to shatter the universe's most sacred act of mercy. The moment the probe's signal reached the human ship, everything changed. Warning klaxons shrieked across their vessel as the ancient human ship began to hum with life. Systems that had maintained perfect stasis for centuries suddenly surged with desperate energy. "What did you do?" Zith's voice shattered into 1,000 discordant notes of horror. Zix's form had turned completely transparent with terror. I only wanted to understand their technology. The probe's quantum signature must have..." On their main screen, cryogenic pods began activating one by one, like funeral pyres being lit across an endless cemetery. Thousands of them. The ship's systems, far from being primitive, executed a flawless awakening sequence. But Zith knew this wasn't salvation. It was the universe's cruelest resurrection. "Emergency transmission to High Command," Zith managed through his panic. "Code ultraviolet. Human awakening in progress. May the stars forgive us for what we've done."